Welcome to the Africa for Zero Waste podcast, where we engage in thought-provoking conversations with people who are having real stories of innovative solutions on zero waste and those policymakers that are making the policy pathways for this to be possible. This year, 2026, the United Nations will mark the 4th annual International Zero Waste Day. Alongside, Accra, the city of Accra, is being featured in the list of 20 cities moving towards zero waste globally. This is an exciting moment, and this is very good for us who are in the climate space. In light of this, today I'm interviewing a climate expert, a Ghanaian leader who is the director on adaptation, climate resilience, and risk management at the EPA. He's currently serving as the chair of the Africa Group of Negotiators, the AGN, at the UNFCCC negotiations. Nana Dr. Antwi Boasiako. You are most welcome, Nana. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Desmond. I'm doing well, and you?
I'm doing good. Our topic today is around the NDCs. The NDCs is the nationally determined contributions. For a little background, under the Paris Agreement of the UNFCCC, the nationally determined contributions are the country-level commitments on climate actions to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. These agreements are updated every 5 years. Now, what is more important is the implementation of such commitments, because at this point, it's more urgent to measure implementation as against just pledges. So as I have Nana in the studio today, many African countries have submitted their updated NDCs. And there's been a lot of commitment, there's been a lot of ambition in terms of mitigation and adaptation goals that these countries have set in Africa. In your opinion and your experience working in this sector, how would you measure, how would you say the progress in implementation has been like?
Okay, so thank you so much for the invitation. I think this is an honor to speak one-on-one on such an important subject. You did mention of the nationally determined contributions as very fundamental for the actions or the efforts to bring down temperature and then also reduce the impact of climate change. And so the nationally determined contributions are critical. They are nationally determined because they are country-owned, country-driven, and they feed into a global bigger picture, which is the Paris Agreement objective. And so that's how come the name nationally determined contributions. You did mention that many African countries have submitted their updated NDCs. So when parties or countries agreed to implement the content of the Paris Agreement, these actions were adopted. And so that forms the foundation or the beginning of the NDCs, which basically started. The Paris Agreement was embraced in 2016. It was signed in 2015, but it was ratified in 2016. And between 2016 and 2020, there was what we call pre-implementation phase. And so there were actions that were being implemented, but they were waiting for the actual start of the implementation of the Paris Agreement, which was supposed to be 2020. The reason being that normally when you have such a global pact, it is always, it takes a longer time for all countries or to get a threshold of the ratification, a certain percentage to be agreed on before the start of the implementation. The Paris Agreement was on record that within 6 months, the 50% with the biggest emitters had already been achieved. So it saw an early implementation.
Wow.
And so that was the pre-implementation phase. So the NDC 1 actually started in 2020 because countries have submitted commitment that starts with 2020 up to 2030.
Mm-hmm.
And now there was what we call common timeframes when it comes to the implementation and reporting, to be able to bring all parties at the same level of reporting. Because the original NDCs that were submitted, some had timelines of 2025, some 2030, some 2035, some even 2040. And it's going to, in terms of comparing efforts in terms of reporting, to be very difficult if you don't have a common time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a decision to have this being revised or reviewed to suit a common time frame. And so now the end year sits at 2035, reviewed in 2025.
Okay.
And this is what they call NDC. Some people call it NDC 3.0, but technically it's 2.0 because the 1.0 was the one which was updated 5 years later. So 2020 was 1.0. It was reviewed in 2025, which is
should have been 2.0.
Which is 1.2.
Yeah, 1.2.
Exactly. Then because you are setting another time frame from 2025 to 2035, that becomes 2.0. But forget about this confusion. The important thing is countries have been asked to update their NDCs. Frankly speaking, as you indicated, it is not many African countries when it comes to the updated NDCs. Some African countries have submitted the updated NDCs. A lot more are still working on theirs. Ghana, for example, had not submitted the NDC 2.0 or 3.0, as you may call it. But we had the updated NDCs done last 4 years. And so what we are in now is what we are implementing now. And then that is what we are going to speak to in this conversation, is the updated NDCs. But when it comes to the new NDCs that are being submitted, a lot of countries in Africa, very few of us have submitted their NDCs. Yeah.
Wow. So, so in that case, maybe take me a bit deeper. Those updated NDCs, those that you are working on, you are in the implementation phase.
Exactly.
What would you say has been your observation with respect to what countries submitted, especially within the African region, what they submitted versus what is happening on the ground? Are there specific sectors that seem to be getting the praise or the more attention versus other sectors?
I think that's very important. So that gives me the opportunity for the person who doesn't understand the content of the NDCs, to just quickly explain that the NDCs are not certain things that are sitting in the sky or in the moon. They are the day-to-day actions that are being implemented by sectors. And so in Ghana, we have the one that we are working with now had about 47 or 49 program of actions. And this 47 or 49 program of actions, I'm not too sure, but it's 47 or 49. It's not 50, it's not 46. Yeah, it's either 47 or 49. That number I cannot, But the most important thing is these program of actions come from the energy sector, the transport sector, the waste sector, the agriculture sector, the key sectors of the economy, the forest or the land-related activities. And they are committing to do certain things that they have been doing or they are commissioned to do as sectors. However, because we are being asked to meet certain targets within a global framework, it means the action must be doubled, and then the pace must be faster, and then the means to do it must be more efficient. And therefore, you need not to do things as business as usual. And so, in trying to be able to implement these actions, for example, within the waste sector, you're looking at waste to energy, for instance, and then also trying to do waste segregation, waste minimization, and so on and so forth. Waste to compost, for example. And then within the agriculture sector, you're trying to build resilient agriculture for the country. How does that happen? Probably looking at agroforestry related issues, planting more trees on farms so that you can have enough moisture and then nutrient to support agriculture related activities. And then once produced, you'll be able to cut them to the market. Because we are coming to talk about waste, organic waste, for example. If perishable products like mangoes or watermelon or tomatoes, for example, are ripe or matured, you harvest and you don't have the means of transportation, for example, to bring them to the market. They get stayed on the farm, they spoil, and then they generate what? Through anaerobic processes, methane is generated. So you get a lot of methane on the farm. And so for the waste sector, these are some of the things. For the energy sector, for instance, you're looking at what? Energy efficiency, renewable energy related issues, where you are trying to bring in more energy that are not conventional, that are not fossil.
Okay.
So using solar, using wind, using hydrogen, and so on and so forth to generate energy to power households and then also industries. You're also looking at efficiencies where you reduce the emissions within the existing consumption framework. So households emissions, you try to bring them down by putting off your lights, by using bulbs that are
energy
saving, by also trying to do cook stoves, for example, trying to make efficiency of the system to make sure that human health is protected, and so on and so forth. You go to the transport, you're looking at sustainable transportation where you are bringing in more higher occupant buses to knock off more trotros or small recreative vehicles and so on and so forth. So these are things that when we talk of the NDCs, they are not certain things that are very far away from us, but the things that we are doing, but being converted in a way that is programmed to be measured and then monitored from time to time. And in doing so, to your question, you need more resources, you need more capacities, you need efficient technology. So these are the three main layers for implementation. So capacities to be able to implement the relevant technologies, be it simple or complex, and then also the needed financial resources to bring in the activities that you want to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your response. I want to go a bit deeper into that because you talked about in responding to what sectors are receiving the most attention. You mentioned certain relevant sectors for this conversation, and one thing you mentioned is methane. Methane, a very prolific greenhouse gas, which is often underestimated when it comes to the waste sector, where a lot of methane is often emitted from landfills, dump sites, among others. Are there currently set particular initiatives that are ongoing mainly to address this food loss, food waste sector as far as pursuing the NDCs is concerned?
Yes, I think the NDCs have quite a number of laudable aspirations. I say aspirations because
let me say something. Earlier on, when you were talking earlier, you mentioned waste to energy. In our organization, we kick against it because most of the time, waste to energy, people just say it when they are referring to incineration. And when it's not medical or hospital waste, most of the incinerators that have been established, especially the popular one in Addis Ababa, is having so many challenges, but it's taking the country so much money. And the people who install this are taking so much money and benefiting, but the country itself is not benefiting. So we prioritize.
So is it the technology that you don't like, or maybe the end product, who benefits? That's the issue.
It has too much complications because the technology itself is capital intensive. It takes away the jobs from the manual workers like the waste pickers and all, and then it creates this illusion that you put your waste into a machine and it bring you energy. However, it doesn't really bring you the energy because you are struggling because your waste source is not sorted. And because it's not sorted, the calorific value is impacted, and then the outcome is really not satisfactory. So because of the way African waste is so mixed up, we prioritize the zero waste approach because then there will be so much education going into it. There will be so much sorting going into it at household level. And then the people, once it is sorted, they can directly recycle it instead of taking it to a plant because then they will make their money.
Okay, so then you're only classifying waste as solid waste.
In this case, yes.
So if
waste.
You look at it from the municipal solid waste,
yes,
this is where, but the liquid waste, for example, using fecal matter, for instance,
biogas is fine
to generate. It's waste to energy.
Yes, exactly.
It's
waste to energy. So I'm just trying to let you know so that because a lot of people, when they say waste to energy, they are always referring to incinerators, and that is not really our core. The full name actually, GAIA, is Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternative. That's the full meaning. Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternative. So it was founded mainly just to kick against incinerators in the US.
Yes, but I don't even think my focus here is even on incinerators.
Yeah.
But we're trying to reduce methane gas as the main greenhouse pollutant from the waste sector.
Yeah.
And it comes in different forms, not from the agriculture sector, for instance. From the agriculture, there are other interventions, but because we are focusing on, I can even take you through the agricultural waste, and then, but when it comes to the interventions on the ground, I have just mentioned biogas as one of the key interventions that we're trying to reduce liquid waste, especially from places where they are problematic. You take areas like schools, for instance, boarding house. In Ghana, we run boarding houses. Same boarding houses, we do a lot of cooking for the boarders, which also end up generating a lot of waste on school campuses. There are interventions that's supposed to support second cycle institutions to be able to reduce their waste by also reducing the methane element that they generate from schools. In the cities, as you did indicated, one of the key things that is being put across is to educate people to be able to segregate, because one of the challenges we have in this country is the segregation aspect, because we have not developed the culture of segregating. And so even if you, for example, Desmond wants to do segregation in your house, and then probably you don't reuse you don't have the capacity to reuse the stuff that you have been able to segregate, and your waste collector comes, they end up boxing everything
put
together,
everything back together,
and all your effort becomes zero. And so one of the things is to educate citizenries to be able to have that culture, to be able to segregate, because in doing the segregation, the organic waste element, for instance, can be used sustainably in homes, backyard gardens, and then for flowers and so on and so forth as organic fertilizers in those directions. And so when it comes to the urban sector, apart from the assemblies being asked And when you take the NDCs, there are components that are being for the sectors and then also for the local government structures. The challenge is, because I have to be honest here, most of the assemblies actually don't have that connection, because some of them even don't know what the NDCs are. And therefore, connecting their effort to the bigger picture of the national target becomes a challenge. The reason is that when you are developing the NDCs, you may not be able to consult all the assemblies. Some of the key assemblies that are very critical, like Accra, like Kumasi, Tamale, Sekondi, Takoradi, Cape Coast, they are on board. And it's rightly so, because when it comes to a critical mass of waste that is generated within these cities, they are very critical. And not only waste, because the NDCs are not only waste. When it comes to complications with the transport sector, these cities are witnessing them. And so we bring them on board. And this time, even the one that we are working on, they are developing their own actions that they will track and then report on. And so they had not been effectively be connected in the process of developing the NDCs. And so the implementation sits a little bit far away from them, even though the NDPC, which and then the Minister of Local Government, which coordinate these assemblies, are part of the process that we're talking about. So it hasn't been maybe 100% success story, but I think there are some good stories on the ground. When it comes to agricultural waste, which also generates methane, it might not be a challenge for probably what you are doing, but when it comes to methane gas, it is. There are also a lot of efforts to support producers to be able to quickly transport these produce to the farms. And then there are also interventions that I have been part of, an assessment of models that are looking at modeling the cost that are associated with these lost produce on the farm and how much is causing the climate and then also the farmer in terms of income. And what will be the solution? The solution has to do with probably providing some refrigerated vans, for example, that can be used to cart this food, even if they spend 1 week on the road, because they are using refrigerations. And then these are solar powered electric vehicles. It is going to be more helpful and more useful. The models have been developed, and then I think resources have been mobilized to be able to address that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nana. You have answered a lot of my questions in one, because the other one I was going to follow up with this was going to be around what are the barriers of actually seeing this in reality in the implementation. But you've mentioned a lot of challenges, the disconnect in government sectors and the knowledge gap, and then our behavioral challenge in not separating or segregating our waste at home, and all that, which is really the reality, right? These are the things that are holding all of us back to catapult the solution.
But the big elephant regarding the challenges is the finance aspects.
Exactly. This is where I was going to come to, because you can't climate finance is that obvious factor that makes all this that could make all this very, very possible. And I was wondering, because you have been in this for so long, and also at the Africa level, your leadership is very clear. What I've been wondering is what have been the bottlenecks in accessing funding to actually implement the NDCs?
Okay, so the financing aspect is very critical. If you look at most of the NDCs that have been submitted within the African continent, largely about 70% of these NDCs, on average, are counting on external resources to be able to achieve the set targets. So what it means is that these actions are conditional on the fact that external resources
Come in.
come in before they can be able to achieve. The remaining 30 or 15 to 30% that are unconditional are largely things that somebody would say the low-hanging ones, like land-related, so afforestation, reforestation things that within our natural systems we can be able to do without any difficulty financially. Now, when it comes to the financing schemes, because we are working, and you started by mentioning the UNFCCC, so the issue that we are discussing here is something that is a baby of the UNFCCC. The UNFCCC have funding mechanisms that have been established to support climate action in developing countries. These mechanisms are the Global Environment Facility, what they call GEF. The GEF has a scope of looking at almost all environmental issues. So they're looking at chemicals, they're looking at waste, they're looking at climate, they're looking at deforestation, all issues related to
Climate.
environment and climate. So that's what the Global Environment Facility, and it's the oldest financing mechanism within the UNFCCC. However, the quantum of money that can be accessed within the GEF is very minimal. And so you cannot be able to use that money to do things that are impactful. Now, you come to the Adaptation Fund. That is also was established as a result of the Kyoto Protocol to mainly look at adaptation-related issues. That fund also depends on 2% amount or money from the carbon market processes under the Clean Development Mechanism. And so assuming you sell carbon within the carbon market framework, 2% of every ton of carbon that is sold is deducted and to be used to support adaptation.
2%?
Yes. And so you can, from the outset, you can actually see that the capitalization or the source of capitalization for this fund is very negligible.
It's very minimal.
Especially when the market is not doing well. When the market is not doing well, it means that credits selling is not appealing, and therefore the market is not good, and you cannot get these deductions into the fund. It also depends on voluntary contribution. So apart from the CRs that you can get 2% of it into the fund, some countries can voluntarily say that we want to donate a certain amount. And because it's voluntary, people are not obliged, or countries are not obliged. And so it sees money, but not too big. Some few countries have dedicated some support, like Germany, Norway, and some countries, to continuously support the Adaptation Fund. But it's not that stronger. Then you come to the Green Climate Fund, which does mitigation and adaptation, and it's the biggest. And even that is just a global pot. And so at the end of the day, when it comes to access, coming to your question, when it comes to asset, it is competitive.
Yeah, very.
And so if you don't have the capacity to write project proposals that can be able to meet the investment areas of these funds, the likelihood is that you may not be able to access. And even if you have the opportunity to access, the question is how much?
Yeah, everybody's going for the same thing.
And so it is really challenging. There are other sources like bilateral funds that you can also engage some countries bilaterally. But that's also another discussion. And then when it comes to the capital market, we'll probably use private money, especially when we're talking about climate technologies and so on. It is also not easy because some of these facilities are not just ordinary concessional loans that have manageable interest. Maybe you go and borrow at at the highest interest rate on the capital market, and it's very difficult for you to use such money to address climate change. Remember, we are developing countries. We have our own development challenges.
Yeah.
And so climate change is just an additional burden. And so having dedicated financial support for countries will be the easiest way to go. Unfortunately, countries have not been able to actually set up dedicated funds to support these actions. In countries where these funds have also been established, they are being misapplied for other things that will not inure to the purpose with which the funds were established.
Wow. It appears more complex than I see it to be from a distance, and it takes people like yourself who are in the middle of it to be able to explain it and break it down this way, because it has so many negatives. And now the question that comes to my mind is, what institutional or policy reforms, and even if we look at Ghana, you are Ghanaian, and if we looked at Ghana, what institutional or policy reforms that could propel this to make implementation much more easier and possible?
I think for policies, we have a lot of them in Ghana, for instance. Probably policies that are directing some percentages of resources to be set aside for these purposes are those that are maybe missing or lacking. And therefore, we can channel our energy towards that direction where we can be able to divert or take some sort of resources to clearly set aside to address waste management related issues or climate change related issues. In Ghana, I remember between 2015 to now, no, 2017 to now, there had been some kind of effort to develop or to establish what we call Ghana Green Fund.
Ghana Green Fund,
which technically is supposed to be established and then support climate and then other green related issues. The Ministry of Finance, and this is a fact, it's not any conjecture, the Ministry of Environment and then the Ministry of Finance and other stakeholders actually worked very hard in this direction to make sure that we get this green fund established. But after the technical work, I don't even know the status of it. For instance, initiatives of this nature could actually be helping to help us to mobilize resources, because Rwanda is an example that because they have an environment or climate fund that brings all resources, external, domestic, into it.
Yeah.
It makes it more directional for such resources to be utilized in that direction. So in terms of policy reforms, we need to be able to get structures that will bring in resources. That's all what we need. We've been talking a lot as a country in all aspects. We have a lot of policies. What we need to do is to get the financing schemes right, be it domestic or external, towards those actions.
Thank you, Nana. And anyone that is watching and in any African country, and this is mainly to the leaders, make sure that you take the process up. Make sure that whatever you start, you take it to a very good finish. Otherwise, we will always start initiatives and it will never yield anything. But let me move away a bit to the civil society space, because I'm asking, I feel comfortable asking you broader scope of questions, because I've known you for quite a long time, and I've known the roles you are playing across board. What would you say would be the role of civil society, youth, women-led groups in actually supporting the implementation? Because, like you rightly said, it is the individual actions and what government responsibility is already that they just need to upgrade. What would you say the role of civil society is in this implementation process?
I think so. That's a very good question, because even if you look at the name, it says nationally determined contributions. It didn't say government determined contributions. So once it says nationally determined contribution, it means all actors.
Yeah.
So civil society, private sector, the public sector institutions. So to make the civil society more active in the implementation phase, we should probably let them be part and own the process.
On the process.
If they are able to own the process and then have a responsibility in some of the actions, then implementation can be. They shouldn't always sit and say we are watchdogs, and so we are there to see what is going to happen, and then we report to the communities or the international community how well government is doing. I think that style of doing things is past and gone. We need to all come together. So this particular NDCs that is being revised, there are some actions that are coming from the civil society organization that they are going to own and implement when this is what's submitted. And so let them be part of the process, get them some responsibilities clearly defined, and then ask them and tax them to be able to do that.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. I think this is how it is.
I also even want to, before you even come in,
Yeah.
because research has actually shown that when people are aware of problems or an issue, I think the likelihood is that they will be able to take action largely. And so we need to take the content of the NDCs to the people.
Yes. Yeah.
Be it roadshow, so that we go to the market woman, don't explain it as NDCs, but explain it as implications of our actions within the market context and how this is affecting us.
Yeah.
Go to the secondary school student on campus. Don't talk about NDCs. Talk about what is being done on campus, on school compound. So you are here, you are being fed 24/7. You are being in electricity, which is on the national grid. The source of the power, you have no idea. You are also actually easing yourself comfortably somewhere. You don't know what happens to this waste. Bring the problem to them, and therefore we want you to be part of this solution. And this is what you can do as a student. Take it to the industry, the private sector, and then let the industry know that, yes, you are producing, you are supplying, but your actions are affecting the environment and then the climate.
Yeah.
What is your bigger contribution to this solution, and how can that be resolved? Within the same private sector, there are some institutions that are financiers, in this case, financial institutions, bankers. They are in for profit, but then assuming tomorrow everything is scattered, where are the banks going to do businesses? There wouldn't be any business. And so place them within this context of these climate discussions and see how these financial institutions can come in, so that it doesn't look like we are looking at something which is very distant away from us, but something that is with us and is going to affect us today and in the near future. And everybody is going to be affected, irrespective of whatever you do. And that, for me, should be. So we need to be intensifying the roadshow to make sure that we take the content of the NDCs to the people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nana. I think it's very clear how civil society can broker this knowledge at the local level. As we are moving towards the end of this conversation, I still have a couple of questions, and one of those, from your experience, because we've always heard the various publications that are talking about African governments being swallowed in debt and so many challenges that have been highlighted. And it makes me wonder how are we in the implementation of the NDCs, how are we making sure that it is people-centered, looking at a continent of youthful population, they need jobs. We talked about waste pickers, they need to be engaged, and the informal sector and what have you. How are we making sure that the implementation of the NDCs is people-centered and not just report-driven?
Okay, so that takes us back to the issue that we just discussed. Frankly speaking, when you look at the content of the NDCs, it is people-centered. But what would take those people-centered issues to the people, to make the people feel part of it, is missing. And this is the finance. For example, I did my PhD with a community that actually uses a lot of biomass for. So they use wood to process fish and then to earn livelihood. And in doing that, they use a lot of wood. So when it comes to deforestation, it is an issue.
Yeah.
And in doing that, they also use old technologies, because you have the conventional forest stones or the furnace that is, you use firewood or charcoal to smoke the fish. And because of incomplete burning, there are a lot of methane or carbon monoxide actually generated.
Yes.
And then these people there are health implications, because they are inhaling all kinds of pollutants, including particulate matter. And so if you are going to provide these people with improved cook stoves, which is one of the key things that the NDC is looking at, is it not people-centered?
It is.
Yes. But if the money is not there to produce these improved stoves to be given to the people, they will still continue to be in the problem, even though the policy says that we are supposed to supply improved cook stoves. We're looking at urban transportation, where you wake up in the morning. Where I live, a journey that can be made within 45 minutes. Sometimes you use 3 hours because of traffic jam.
Yeah.
And so if there is a policy which is within the NDC to say that we are going to supply higher occupancy buses within the corridors of Accra to supply efficient transportation in the city, is it not people-centered?
It is.
Because those who are even selling within this traffic are inhaling a lot of fumes and then the fact that you sit in traffic for hours actually compromises your health, for instance. But if the money is not there to buy these higher occupancy buses, then they remain aspirations. And so for the NDCs that we have, they are people-centered. I think all what we need to do together is to actually see where can we get the budgeted resources, especially money, that can be able to help us. Because if you are going to buy green buses and you are going to take loan, which the buses are, because they are green buses, they are more expensive than the normal diesel buses. Do you get it?
Yeah.
Yes. And you are going to use your limited budget to go and buy buses because you want to save the environment. In development sense, as a developing country, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. And so you need a lever that says that, okay, use your normal budget that you wanted to use for the diesel bus, and then the top-up will give it to you as grant. And this is where the battle has always been between us and then the developed countries. And so we have people-centered programs I want to convert these purpose and test programs to actual programs on the ground. Is what is lacking, which is the finance, which is the technology that is supposed to deliver them. Yes.
And that is quite a huge gap. And I mean, in all fairness, this has to be a gap that should be filled by someone, especially like in climate terms, the developed countries that have caused most of the pollution, industrializing. But as we are in this situation, and we talked about the submission of updated NDCs. I'm wondering, with all these lessons and all this that we've been discussing, what should Africa prioritize differently? And what should Africa, in terms of timelines, the 2035, what kind of opportunities should Africa seize before 2035?
So they're in two phases. We need to probably prioritize on things that they are low hanging.
Mm-hmm.
So the actions that we can be able to do on our own without much pressure from outside. And this can be awareness raising, internal capacity buildings, and then also trying to, when it comes to greening in the cities, we can be able to also do some of these issues. The other thing is to be very intentional about budgeting for climate-related hazards. Because whether we like it or not, they are coming. We're talking about waste. Most of these wastes are choking drainage systems and causing floods. And so we need to be intentional about our budgeting systems, because the geopolitics in this world today is not favorable to us as Africa. And we have to probably revise our approach to be more domestic focused than external.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nana, Dr. Antwi Boasiako, for accepting to be on our podcast today, the Africa for Zero Waste podcast, and speaking specifically on the NDCs, and in particular the waste sector, where we've been discussing how to actually limit the emissions that are coming from this particular sector. We so much appreciate you coming, and we do believe that this conversation will go a long way to help the audience, and myself included. I'm very well informed, and I really appreciate that. This brings us to the end of this episode.
Thank you so much, Desmond, for also inviting me for this very wonderful engagement. I think we will continue to learn from each other, and much as time will allow us, we'll continue to share. And so thank you for this opportunity, and look forward to more continuous engagement in other aspects. Thank you so much.
Amazing. And that brings us to a close of this particular episode. Look out for GAIA, Zero Waste for Africa, Africa for Zero Waste. Whichever way you do it, you will find us everywhere, always preaching about people-centered, just transition approach to managing waste in Africa, which is what is most important, because it creates jobs and it improves livelihood as against heavy capital-dependent technologies that are continuously putting countries in the zone. Thank you.